Like, yeah. Classic. Look at the over the shoulder. I don't even know what that is. Is that a security camera that I like brought along with me?
I think so.
Oh man, that's impressive. Well, welcome back to episode 2 of HUNTR Podcast, and maybe, I don't know, our favorite state to ever hunt in and discuss. You know, call it the Sunflower State, call it Land of Oz, Land of Giants. It's Kansas.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think in today's podcast, Jared and I are going to talk a little bit about our history with Kansas, in particular, even this last season and some of our ups and downs, and, you know, kind of keeping on the same track as last year, you know, last show, new slate for us to really attack here in 2021, and you know, a lot of expectations for Kansas 2021.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Kansas is like our gateway drug to Midwestern whitetails. Probably it's one of the first and only. I'm gonna actually take these headphones off. I'm gonna go headphoneless.
Cool, do it.
It's not helping me at all.
However you feel.
But yeah, it's kind of our gateway drug to Midwestern whitetails in the sense that you've been hunting there for quite some time, and aside from my family farm in Ohio, it's been my first experience to that, and so a gateway in the sense that now I think this year we're jumping into 3 or 4 other states, but it all started with Kansas.
Well, I mean, let's gonna go through a little bit of history here. You know, and I'll start. I started hunting Kansas for the first time in 2013. First, I guess, out-of-state hunt for me. At that time, I was living in Missouri, so I was in the Midwest. You know, I was hunting big deer. I'd killed, you know, 125-inch deer with my bow. But that trip was kind of my first experience to, number one, hunt a place like Kansas.
How'd you get to? Who invited you to Kansas for the first time?
It was Marcus. You know, it was the first time that I met our buddy Marcus out there, which, you know, now we're going on year number 8.
You met Marcus at a trade show?
Not even. It was when I started doing Buck Score app. We had run a national deer contest with Outdoor Channel at the time. And, you know, we basically had put out there to say, you know, Jeremy can't score all these deer, right? We had thousands of deer coming in from all across the country that we were scoring for this big contest and all these prizes and giveaways. And so Marcus was one of the people who said, you know, hey, like, I'll take the test, you know, validate that I'm an official scorer of Buck Score, you know, and I'll help you score all these deer. Which in retrospect, I'm not sure was the smartest thing that we could have done now knowing Marcus.
I guess you were taking anybody at the time.
Yeah, we were pretty damn desperate. So, but it was funny because, you know, he basically said, hey, listen, you live in Columbia, Missouri. You know, you're 4 hours from me. Like, I'll set you up. Come hunt Kansas. And it was the first time, you know, I had ever even considered, like, traveling out of state to hunt. You know,
you said you were living in Missouri at the time.
Yeah, I always hunted whatever state I was in. You know, I just moved from Mississippi, which was a whole experience in itself, living down south. Now I'm in Missouri, which, you know, for a Pennsylvania kid was like, all right, it's the Midwest. Like, there are big bucks, and there were. So I guess my expectations for a state like Kansas were kind of, I don't know, not necessarily that it caught me off guard, but I was extremely surprised because here I had thought I'd been already hunting the Midwest, like the mecca of whitetail. But when you step foot in Kansas, it's a whole different ballgame.
It's pretty different. How far was that from where you were living at the time?
4 hours, you know.
Wow, that's it.
Yeah, and so...
Because Marcus is from southeastern Kansas. How far do you think?
We're about an hour east of Wichita is where now we have leases and have been hunting, and that's where I killed... I guess the famous, oh God, I livered him buck, right? You know, but it's one of those things.
Which, by the way, I do want to see. I don't know even if we have the ability to pull it up or if that's going to mess with what's on our screen. But at some point, that's on the HUNTR YouTube channel.
Yep.
See if you can pull it up, and we'll mess with that at some point.
Yeah, so we'll try to get it pulled up. But if anybody want to watch,
that was the first buck that was the first year you were hunting out there.
Yeah, first year, first morning. Literally, I rolled in the night before.
In Marcus's favorite spot.
The only spot, right? And, you know, this is the first time I've met Marcus, too, right? So walk into the house, there's giant bucks everywhere. So it's like, okay, this guy's legit. Now, given, you know, anybody...
Well, not the first time you met Marcus.
Yeah.
Well, he had volunteered for the
I'd never met him in person.
Okay.
So it's literally, my wife's like, so where are you going? I'm like, Kansas. Like little.
Some guy invited me to come hunt.
Yeah,
he's got a spot.
Like, she's like, how do you know this guy? I'm like, oh, he like scores deer for us. And it's like, really? Like, you're just going to go stay with him? I'm like, yeah. He said, come home.
You're like, well, he lives in Kansas, so yes.
Yeah. So, and that was, to be honest, that was my first experience with draw hunts as well, right? Because everywhere I had hunted, I just bought a tag over the counter. So
Kansas has been a draw as long as you've been hunting there?
As long as I've been there. Now, back in 2013, I think it was almost 100% guarantee for bow at least. Now we know that it's not like that.
It's a good disclaimer for archery.
Yeah. But, at that point in time, he's like, yeah, listen, if you put in, you're going to get drawn for this unit.
Yeah.
So I drove down there. I don't know. It was November 6th I drove down. He had been sending me trail camera pictures of just a stud 10-point, and it basically had owned this area. And Marcus had already killed a pretty good buck earlier in the season there. So
when did you go up? Was this like a October, November hunt?
Yeah. So it was November 6th. 7th was when I was hunting, right? So we went there the 6th, checked the cameras and everything. We literally walked behind a house 250 yards, and it was kind of like, all right, this is where we're hunting. Like this is Kansas. I mean, there's miles of pasture and crops and river bottoms, and I just walked like 250 yards behind his aunt's old house. And he's like, yeah, no, this
seems like Marcus's kind of spot.
Yeah, this is a spot. I was like, okay, cool, man. Like, this sounds great.
Were you hunting a corn pile that day?
Yeah, hunting a corn pile, which
is big in Kansas. I mean, dude, there's a few states, and Kansas is one of them, where those, at least the residents, are ride or die by a corn pile.
And in retrospect, that may have been the first time I ever hunted over bait. Because every other state that I had lived in, it was illegal.
It's illegal in Missouri?
Yeah, legal in Missouri.
Cool.
I think in Mississippi there was some loose speculations there, like you could have a feeder on the property you were hunting, but it couldn't be within eyesight. So like this is the first time like I'm literally like, okay, there's a pile of corn. Like I feel weird about it, but I'm also like, there's a giant buck here.
It's kind of funny seeing how the residents of Kansas treat that. Like even in Ohio where I hunt, when I first started putting some bait out, I was like, all right, let's dump a corn pile here, or a little bit of Khmer deer. I remember I used years and years ago. And now to see, we'll ask Kev to go out and dump some corn for us, and he's like, okay, I got about 400 pounds. Where do you want it?
Crazy, man. Well, and I think that the, growing up in Pennsylvania, you heard about things like baiting, and it was like, yeah, that's a bunch of bullshit.
It's no
right?
go.
Nobody does that. Like that's illegal. Those are for people who can't hunt, right? And there's still a mindset of that in some points, but like when you actually do it, people think, oh, you have a corn pile out, like you should be able to kill a booner every time. It's like, listen, just because you have a corn pile doesn't necessarily make it that any easier when you're hunting. And I know that sounds weird to probably people who haven't put corn piles out, but it's the truth. Like you can go out there and put a corn pile out in Kansas, and you'll get bucks on it. 99% of those pictures will be in the middle of the night.
I'm trying to think back over. I mean, I'm almost 28. I've been deer hunting since I was 12. I don't think I killed a buck over a corn pile until last season, and I don't know if you would even consider. I mean, that was this fuzzy wuzzy buck that I ended up killing, and there was maybe a little bit of corn left, but it was really a food buck that I was hunting.
So let's talk about this. Let's finish, because I think this is kind of this evolution that we've had.
I distracted you.
No. For 8 years, we've kind of hunted this place. So that first year, first morning, I remember it was like frosty, no wind. This is before we realized like, hey, deer don't move unless there's wind in Kansas, right? And I will say, out of anything that I can hunt in, I'll hunt in pouring down rain, monsoons, whatever. I despise hunting in wind, right? I feel like a high wind and a consistent wind just like dulls every sense I have, right? And it's taken 8 years even for me to realize, like, without that wind in Kansas, those deer don't move, right? And so I remember clearly it was cold, it was frosty, there was no wind, deer started popping out of the CRP field, and I like look up and there's this giant 10-point, just staring down at a couple smaller bucks that had been walking around me. And it was like, at that time I'm trying to self-film.
This is the early days. This is when guys were I didn't even know you at this point.
Yeah, no, Stone Road didn't even exist at this point.
Yeah, I didn't know you at this point.
Right?
I think you were caking face paint on your...
I absolutely was. Like I was trying, and you look at it and it's like, I literally had a cake full of like black face paint on.
It looked like you took a 5-gallon bucket of face paint and just dipped your face in it. You're good to go. And then put your glasses on over top of it.
I think I was wearing Realtree at the time or something, was like light as snow. So it's like dark face, light as snow. Like I'm in a tree that, the stand had probably grown into 17 years before that, and it all worked out, right? I remember clearly having this buck come in. I ended up snort wheezing him because he was working away from me, snort wheeze him, and we had known he was a fighter. He pushed every buck that we ever saw on camera out of there, walked into like 25 yards and pulled the shot and shot him in the liver, and he ran, I don't know, 350 yards.
Which to this day is the famous, oh God, I livered him.
Oh God, I livered him.
Yeah, if we can find it, we'll show that to you at some point here.
It's a classic.
It's hilarious. Well, because I think at some point you lost he was out of range. I mean, I know how hard it is to try to self-film a bow kill, and so I don't recall if you were on him perfectly or not, but you...
It was, actually. I know he was a little bit, he was dead center in the frame. I think he was a little bit high in the frame, maybe.
But you can't see it. I think you're right. You can see,
it's perfect.
and the first words out of your mouth are, "Oh God, I livered him."
Well, I think, and I mean, obviously, we're talking 8 years ago. I remember trying to stop him. He didn't. If I let him go, he was out, gone. And so I did what every bow hunter says: "Hey, don't do that."
That you never did stop.
I shot him on the move, right, and it hit like probably 3 or 4 ribs back from where I wanted.
Not a bad shot, but back a little bit.
Yeah, and and I mean enough that I had a little bit of him angling away too. And don't get me wrong, I mean that deer bled like crazy. And he ran. I watched him beeline across this cut bean field.
You were shooting ram cats at the time.
Yeah, ram cats at the time. 250 yards, just gone.
Out of sight. You didn't see him go down.
Out of sight. And there's a river there, Falls River. And, it was like, okay, well, where to go? And, I mean, when Marcus and I found him, Marcus actually found him. We were tracking up there. I mean, that deer ran straight to his deathbed, And for me, that was my first experience with a big buck, right? I mean, truly 155-inch, just right over the shoulder back here.
Yep.
And it was like, okay, like, this can happen, right? And
it's cool how that makes it tangible. Like when you kill a big buck, I remember feeling a sense. I don't know which one it was specifically, but maybe it was that first one that I killed in Kansas. But certainly, as I've killed more and more of them, I've started feeling like, oh, these aren't just things that I dream about and I see on TV. Like they're real. They live in these woods. I can kill one.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing with that season, so that was 2013. It happened really easy, right? And since then, I don't think it's ever happened that easy.
It seems to always happen that way for you. Now, you said I didn't realize that this buck was the first time you'd ever hunted Kansas. The first morning.
First morning.
How many first morning Kansas bucks have you killed?
A lot.
At least 2 or 3.
Well, I mean, it goes back to kind of our mindset. Like I feel like whether you're running and gunning or you're stepping into a stand for the first time. There's me. Go back a little bit on that, Ian. I think. There's some classic face paint.
I don't know if we'll be able to hear this or not, but
go right there. There you go.
Here he is.
There he comes and into the center high frame. And I mean, obviously camera's low. I tried to stop him there. He didn't stop, and then I shot.
Yeah. There's the slow mo.
Oh yeah,
the sound in this video slow mo just like
literally at this,
there he is.
At this time, like I'm editing everything double slow mo in zoomed in. I mean, this was classic 2013.
Yeah, look, here it is, perfect.
Yeah,
little back.
Oh
God, I livered him.
Yep, right here I said, oh God, I livered him. There he goes across the CRP field.
Man.
Which keep in mind, I mean, I'm literally hunting a tree line in a CRP field with 250, 300 acres of cut beans around me. And it's like, where does this deer come from? Like, yeah. Classic. Look at the over the shoulder. I don't even know what that is. Is that a security camera that I brought along with
me?
I
think so.
Oh man, that's impressive.
Wow.
Shooting the old bow tech out to 100 yards.
Jump to the end here. Can we see what this buck looks like?
Yeah, jump through. I mean, the blood was good. There he is. Yeah. So there you go. I mean, awesome time length, huge the two things, and this is where, again, biggest buck I had ever killed in my life at that time. The two things that I noticed here right away, first of all, this deer had amazing time length and mass, but he had, I think, a 14-inch inside spread, and his beams were 20 inches. That deer, if had a normal, call it beam and spread for what he was, would have easily been in the mid-160s probably. You know, still an awesome deer. I mean, one that, you know, I look at every day when we're here in the office. But, yeah, I mean, so that literally is first morning, like right away. I end up probably getting pretty intoxicated that evening. That's
the move.
So
man.
that started. I don't know if everybody else has these kind of traditions and stuff, but one of the traditions that we have in Kansas is when you kill a buck in Kansas, we drink Weller's whiskey.
Yep. I didn't even have to kill a buck. I think it was the first morning there. Marcus is like, "Here you go, initiation, swig of Weller's."
I think he did the same with my dad.
And it was I was probably 23, like the first time. I went, 23, something like that. He hands me the bottle. I took a swig of it, and it was first thing in the morning before
we had
coffee.
already been up for 24 hours.
And we were shed hunting. I was already tired, and we were going shed hunting. We weren't actually there to hunt. Took a swig, and we went to like Ace Hardware. It's like the only hardware store in town. And he's like, "You got to see, you know, the lady that owns the store here's got some giant sheds that she's found." And I took this swig of, and it was just enough that I dropped one of these sheds, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Luckily, don't worry, it's just like an 80-incher.
Luckily, it was fine. And
oh, that's funny. So
swig of Weller's,
yeah. So you know, experience the Weller's that night. Next morning, I get up and I actually went out, shot a doe. I think I filmed that one too, and literally loaded both of those deer up. Went back to Missouri that day, and that was kind of it. It was like, okay,
almost too easy, huh?
That's Kansas, and so that set in motion a couple things. Now, obviously, so I think Marcus's place there is like 150 acres.
And he's hunting on family ground, right? That's a
yeah. It's a family piece of ground. I mean, the guy has killed, I don't know, 10 150 pluses off of that. A couple into the low 160s, mid 160s.
Well, and Marcus will tell you too. He's not a die-hard bow hunter. If he doesn't kill that thing within the first 2 weeks of the season, like he might not get out.
Well, he
again.
gets cold easily.
He gets cold easily. And Marcus is a great guy, a good friend of ours, and he's been really generous to put us on a bunch of deer. But that's his style, man. He likes to kill them those first 2 weeks, and he gets it done.
I think it was the year that I killed that buck. He killed, which I'll probably nag him to the day that he and I both die, but he killed a 3-year-old.
That's that giant 3-year-old he's got
was
stuffed
in like
the
the
living room.
low 160s. It was truly a future 200 typical.
It's a freak.
You know, it looks like a doe mounted on the wall.
Was that day one, first day of the season?
But it was 97 degrees when he shot that deer. Like, I remember him on camera sending me the picture and being like, I'm looking at the temp stamp and I'm like, dude, is it 97 degrees? He's like, yeah, it's so hot right now. I'm like, I can't even fathom hunting in that kind of weather. But what that set in motion was partially, you know, the needle in the vein of what Kansas and what like a true Midwestern whitetail mecca.
Needle in the vein. That's quite an expression.
I mean, I feel like that's what it is.
It is
right?
awesome, man. Well, and there was a few years that passed. You probably hunted Kansas if you're saying you've been there for 8 years, you probably hunted it at least 4 or 5 years before I got the invite to come out.
So 2014. So basically, after I killed that buck, I said, "Hey, man, I'm 4 hours away. I
would have been a junior in college at that point.
Yeah, I don't want to step on your toes, right? Could you talk to some local people about leasing property?" Again, no experience in ever leasing ground. I just said, "Hey, can we find that?" And listen, for anybody that's looking to lease property, and unless you're using services like Base Camp Leasing, which we use, if you know somebody in an area, that's how you're going to get property. Right, you basically have to have another local go to bat for you because here we are coming as non-resident guys. Like nobody trusts us.
Why would they?
And so we found 140 acres and an 80-acre piece owned by the same gentleman, same family. Still lease that to the day.
Different from the one that Marcus hunts, but
different from the one. Yeah. And they had closed hunting on it because years prior during rifle season, somebody had shot cows with a gun. I don't know, accident or on purpose.
Multiple cows?
I don't know. That's the story how it goes.
Wow.
And so we came in and said, listen, all we care about is bow hunting anyways. Like I don't even care about guns.
Can you imagine shooting a cow on somebody's property?
It's a lot of meat.
Yeah. How would you pack that thing out?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of meat. So Marcus went to bat for us with these guys, and they said, you know what, like, yes, we'll do it. So we have 140 and 180 acres, not too far, right? I mean, same general area, and so again, it hadn't been hunted in years, right? I remember specifically putting out cameras in September, and like instantly getting pictures of like 3 or 4 big bucks.
Which bucks did you have on camera?
So we had Wide Boy.
Wide Boy.
That was, and at that time, that deer had been, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. I remember Bill Winke and I, when I got the picture of him on a cell camera, I was like, Bill, how old do you think this deer is? He's like,
old.
Ancient. Like, shoot him and dust comes out.
Yeah.
And then there was a big 8 that was probably in the mid 140s that had been running around there. And then later in the year, in October, we got white whale for the first time.
No Super Freak that year?
Yeah, Super Freak then right after that.
Oh, really?
So we had
Multiple
at that time,
booms.
this deer was probably in the mid 150s, I would say, as a 10.
Yep.
White whale, we come to find out, 175-inch deer. Super Freak, 181-inch deer. So we have those 3 bucks all on 140 acres, basically, because they were on the other one, but just not a whole lot.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's when all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is where to be. And keep in mind, that was all pasture ground, abandoned ground. Like, there was cows moving in. There was no crops.
When we talk Kansas, I can't help but think of like Chevy Chase and Vegas Vacation. And in my head, it's Kansas. My eyes glaze over. It's like, here we go.
It was just crazy to think of, like, that was, to me, that was the first, it's the first time I leased property, you know, which was an expense. But it was for good reason.
What expense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You just
we're deer hunting. We'll do at that. Yeah,
over.
man. Once you get in that mindset, there's not a lot that you won't do to, you know, get on some of these big deer.
So I remember at that time, so Marcus gets a picture of white whale, sends me a camera picture with basically his thumb over the antlers and just the body of the deer. And I was like, yeah, you son of a bitch. Like, he's like, what do you think? I was like, that's a brute. And then, like, you see him, he sends me the real picture, and I'm like, wow, that's a booner. That was, like, maybe the first time I'm laying eyes on a booner that I'm about to hunt. So we went down, same time frame. Actually, maybe a little bit before. I think it was, like, November 3rd or 4th through the 7th or 8th. We hunted, like, 4 or 5 days. And, you know, on the 1st, I had went down to basically bait all our camera stations, make sure stands were good. And
must have been nice at the time, only 4 hours away. To where now we're what, 17?
17.
A little tougher.
Yeah. And that's when I checked the camera and I got Super Freak for the first time. And then that deer, I mean, it's sitting next to a 2-year-old 8 or 9 point, and this deer comes in and it's like, oh my God, that is a monster.
It's crazy. You know, at some point we'll have to try to get some kind of an aerial map to show what this property looks like. I mean, it's not like a jungle by any means.
It's a creek bottom, which
is a creek bottom.
That is the, I mean, again, evolution of learning how this thing is. Like, you find timber in general on a property, and it's something you probably should snatch up, right? Because there are no real big blocks of timber except for the core land, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Most of it is cattle pasture or old pasture fields, some ag. But if you can find these creek bottoms, they're just corridors. And these deer, you know, I'm used to seeing a deer on a particular piece of property, and he stays within that same area of that property, maybe moves a little bit. These deer are covering miles, you know, maybe even a day.
Sure.
Because they're busting across the field, you know, that's a half mile or 3/4 of a mile, you know, like it's nothing. So
well, it's not like the Northeast either. It's like, not necessarily that these big open spots are the best place to be, but it's not uncommon during the rut to see a buck coming across, you know, a 300-acre field. Like, he crossed the road, like just crossed the middle of the road at 10:30 in the morning, and he's walking, you know, right at you, clear across the field. It's just different.
We have a ton of experience like that. So, like, we didn't see the only deer that I had seen during that hunt. Not that I would have shot him, that was the first time we had ever laid eyes on a deer that we would eventually call Super 7. And at that time, he was what I expected to be probably a 2-year-old 6-point. And I actually told Marcus to have his son kill that deer, which he tried. multiple shots.
Because genetically, he was pretty weak.
Yeah, it looked like a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
You know?
He was a 7-point at the time, or maybe even a 6.
Clean 6. And I filmed him. I filmed a lot of them on that
Not that 2 years old is like old enough to really know what that deer is going to turn into, but like he's not ever going to be.
It wasn't anything that we were,
you know,
deer. If a kid wants to kill something like that, I'm never going to stop him.
Sure.
And so that was the only deer that we'd seen. But again, benefit of me being 4 hours away, I hunted often. So I came back around Thanksgiving, and that is when I called in Wide Boy for the first time. I was over on our 80-acre piece. It was the one time that I wish I had a decoy, because that buck came in ready to just trump something.
Yeah.
And, got to about 55 or 60 yards and just knew something. He's like, I'm not seeing a buck here. Something's up. And I came back multiple times. I hunted, I think, twice after we came out and did like our normal trip in November. And then I came back in December. And I think it was December 20th is when I killed white whale, right? So 2013, first year there, one day, 155-inch buck, wrap it up. 2014, multiple hunts trying to kill one of these 3 giants. Come to find out that Super Freak had got hit by a truck probably. He ended up being found dead, and he's in Kev's barn now.
Along with like every other deer in that area that's been
right.
killed.
Any other deadhead. And that wasn't too far. He was crossing the road. We knew there was a chance that these cattle trucks blow up and down that highway pretty frequently. Wide Boy, had an opportunity at him, but just didn't capitalize. And then White Whale, which was really the buck I wanted to shoot, worked me over, but ended up catching him on the GoPro, which, again, people can complain all they want because there's a bait pile there.
That was the following year after the Ogata Liverton buck?
Yeah, so it's 2015-14.
If you go on that same YouTube channel, there's it's something like Greatest GoPro. Just search the channel for GoPro and see what you can find there.
Yeah, there should be.
There's one other one. It's a doe kill. It's not that one. There's another one.
I'll kind of go through that story real quick. I'd been hunting. I think I came in like 2 days before that. I'd seen a couple decent bucks coming out of the neighbor's property.
At this point, though, we had gotten connected. So between the time that you killed this first one.
Yeah, because now it's December 2014. Stone Road Media has been alive for a year, right? And you were working for us at that time.
Yeah, out of college. And so at the time, it was you and Steve that were going out to Kansas. And cool. So we'd gotten connected somewhere in the midst of that.
Yeah, I think you'd been working with us on the Deer Grow projects. You'd been working with us on Stone Road. At this time, Hunter essentially is called Buck Advisor.
Well, yeah, and
one and the same.
If people go to our YouTube channel, they will see some old videos from the Buck Advisor stuff. In fact, that hunt that we just killed, and so that was kind of the very beginning of what this Hunter project has evolved from.
Very much rooted in it, and so I'd always and I had tried with trail cameras at first. Maybe I guess because I was probably too cheap to buy a GoPro. But at some point along the line, my whole goal was I wanted to catch an exit shot on GoPro. So I wanted a GoPro camera at like ground level, looking up at a deer and capturing an exit. So I think it was the week before that I did a trial run and shot a doe. And it was okay. Doe was still kind of off. I mean, think of it. I'm in the corner of this cut soybean field, and I've got corn piles out. But I've got this single GoPro in one area, and I'm waiting for a doe to step in front of it so that I can make the shot. I mean, the stars are really having to align here. So I ended up getting the doe on the GoPro, but it just wasn't quite at the right angles. And so fast forward to December 20th. It was an evening. I had deer all over me, does all over me, small bucks.
And this lease that you're on is literally an 80-acre field.
Yeah, I'm in a hedgerow.
The only trees on the whole place are, just lining the edge of it. And there's a nice piece of ground behind you that doesn't get hunted at all. But the hope is that these deer are coming out to the corn pile in front of you or to whatever's planted in this field. And
keep in mind, this is 2014. We still have this lease, right? This stand, not an exact stand, but the same stand area, I would say somebody is hunting it every year that we have gone to Kansas since 2014.
Yeah, it's just the 80 to us.
This is the only deer and only buck and second deer to that other doe I shot that has been killed out of that 80 acres.
Killed and recovered.
And recovered. Whole different thing. Yeah, here you go. Dude, perfect. So listen, you could see my silhouette if you pause it right there, Ian. Like right where this doe just jumps in.
Or here.
Yeah, start it just real quick. You can see.
There you go.
You could see my silhouette. Like, this is a no-no, right? If I'm a bow hunter, the last thing I want is to be silhouetted on the skyline. And again, I'm in a hedgerow. There's not many options here for me to do anything. You see the corn pile. This isn't a tree. This is a deer's leg about to step on the GoPro. So as this thing kind of progresses, go ahead and forward it. The one thing that doesn't show is this buck that I had killed that we call white whale had actually snuck in behind me and underneath the stand. He spooked back out and he circles. And if you can watch clear over here.
Look, here he comes.
Yeah, you'll see his antlers start coming through. Now, this is a 175-inch monster, right? And I'm shaking like a leaf in this tree. You can see me getting ready to draw here even.
Look at these
right?
does getting antsy.
And this deer did not ever look up at me. The does are looking. He did not ever look up. And, I mean, you couldn't plan this. I'm in full draw right now.
Here it comes.
Swack.
Look at the arrow.
Blood dripping down. The deer ran 30 yards and fell over, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack.
I can remember, like, that very first walk into the stand in the dark in Kansas. Like, it's just so desolate out there.
Yeah. Like brightest stars in the sky you'll ever see because there's no ambient light.
It's just so hard to describe without going out and experiencing it for yourself. I mean, it's something that every bow hunter should, every hunter should try to experience at some point in their life.
We had a bead on a big shooter.
Yeah.
You know, and crazy enough, it was the only shooter really that we had seen on that property.
It seems like sometimes that happens is we got this camera in a spot and we just got lucky that this buck was coming past here every day, every other day. And I mean, young bow hunter at the time, still, you know, trying to learn here as we're going, but it seemed like this deer was on enough of a pattern. I think at the time I was a little bit conflicted with whether or not I wanted to hunt that buck because he was, but as far as we could tell, 140, 145 inch.
We figured he was, 4 years old too? I mean,
buck, you know, and while this would have been the biggest buck I've ever killed, you know, I see the kind of deer that are out here and I'm like, I wasn't sure, you know, and so I think it wasn't until probably the third or fourth day of the 7 or 8 day hunt that we had there that I was like, okay,
I'm married to this
I'm ready to jump into this spot here. And so this was on the new lease that we call Roberts
on the tram road.
It's really just it's a river bottom that you can see all the way across it. And so we had hung this stand in August or September.
Not the best hang either. Not because of the way we hung it. It was just the situation of where he was in an elevated position and the tree sat low. So you were almost eye level with what we called the tram road. It was an old logging road or old railroad bed.
It's an old railroad bed,
right?
Old railroad bed. An old railroad
there.
And so it's basically pasture up above it, which we can use to access. There's the tram road itself, and then it drops down into, you know, what ultimately is this like, it's a river that runs. It's the Falls. Is that the Falls River as well?
Yes.
The Falls River runs right through there. And so, like I said, third or fourth day of that hunt, I started sticking that out. And I don't remember exactly when it was. It may have been the second or third day that I was hunting that spot. I got eyes on that deer.
Yep. Came across the river right from public.
He was in the river. So the first time I saw him, and it was pretty slow aside from that. I hadn't seen
it. Was warm.
It's not like there was a bunch of other deer. It's not a big timber area. It's not a major intersection. It's literally just a river bottom. And that buck was just using that spot. He was the man down there. And so I turned around. It was mid-morning, maybe like 9 o'clock. And I turned around and I could see this deer in the river. And first thing I did is grab my rattling antlers and I just cracked him, you know, and I'm looking out and like, unlike some of these states where this is Kansas, here he comes.
Yeah, he was barreling.
Here he comes. And so I watch him jump up out of the river and he's running at me. And so I scramble to get my, my antlers hung up. I grab my bow, I get ready. And I think my wind was dead wrong at this point. I mean, it was blowing right to where he was going to end up out here. And he came charging in. Here he comes.
Yep.
And it was a close call. He ended up coming in to 40 yards. There was like a little, I don't know, it was a gas line or some kind of a marker that I remember ranging. I knew he was at 40 yards. I felt comfortable with that 40-yard shot. Would like for it to be closer, but I think I came to full draw on him.
I think he did too.
I think I came to full draw on him.
He was angling to you though, right?
Yeah, he was, if anything, angling to me a little bit, maybe broadside, but I just didn't have a good shot. I didn't have the right shot. I didn't feel comfortable with it. He was walking from the river at that point towards the tram, and he ended up walking right up onto it and kind of up and away from me.
Up into the pasture.
And I just never had an opportunity, and it just didn't happen. I'm glad I didn't take that shot. I could have tried to weasel one through there, but it wouldn't have been the shot that would. And the other thing that was in the back of my mind is that deer was really close to the property line at that point. That stand is maybe only 60 yards from the property line.
Probably, yeah.
And
you're better to catch them coming into the property than trying to go away from the property.
So if he runs 20 yards in that direction, I mean, it gets messy. We have to get permission to get over there, and I just don't want to take that shot. But anyways, it gave me the confidence to know, like, he was down there. I had a really good encounter.
You committed at that point. I mean, you never got out.
Had a good encounter.
Dark to dark.
And I don't think it was the next day. I probably hunted the whole next day.
It was the last full day you killed that deer.
So I must have hunted it 2 or 3 days after that encounter.
Yep.
And I never saw him.
We had pictures of him at night, because keep in mind, we had a cell camera on that tram.
We had a couple pictures of him at night. I knew he was still in the area.
And this is a good pause, though, for a second, because we talked about this earlier, and it's like, oh, Kansas and corn and stuff. You're not hunting corn here.
Yeah,
you're in a corridor. You're in a travel corridor. And so don't think like, oh, everybody that hunts in Kansas just has this feeder. There are a lot of people that do that, and as do we. But a lot of our successes have been in these key corridors, of which are either we don't have corn on or on public, which you can't bait on. Mm-hmm. So
it was just one of those core areas that we kind of stumbled into. We got the camera in the right place, figured out this deer was here pretty consistently, and started hunting it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, corn is not our go-to strategy by any means.
No. If anything, it's just to get eyes on them.
Yeah, if the deer is there and we can kill them without it, I think your chances are probably better. You know, whenever he comes in, he's going to be less on edge, and
for sure,
there's all kind of stuff with that. But so, anyways, like you said, I think it was the last full day of that week. I got in there. I remember feeling like just exhausted. You know, I had hunted that stand at that point for probably 4 or 5 full days. We weren't getting out. I mean, I was sitting the whole day.
That wears on you too, man.
Sitting the whole day. We're packing lunches. We would get in there, sit from dawn till dusk. And like I said, it was the very last day at this point. I got in, and I can remember. So the first thing that happened that day was I forgot my hat.
Yes.
I didn't have a beanie. I don't even think I had.
do remember.
I don't even think I had a hat. I was driving Steve's truck.
Yeah.
And we're hunting maybe 10 minutes outside of town.
Sure.
I was halfway to the property, and I remember thinking like, oh shoot, like dude, I'm gonna be like bald. I'm just gonna be like open head guy out here in the woods. Like I should turn around.
And we were staying at a motel.
I should turn around
at this point.
And I was kind of like, I don't know, like I'm right on the edge of when I should be getting in and stuff. And I decided not to turn around. And fortunately, Steve had just gotten that truck that year, and so there was actually a dealership hat sitting in the center console. Like, what are the chances of there just being a loose hat?
The old Ford rock camo.
It was a camo hat too. It was some kind of like it was a Realtree camo Ford hat.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
So I threw that on, and ran out to the stand, and I hadn't been in the stand for maybe 10 minutes. It was still really dark, but the sun was starting to crest up over the pasture that I had walked through. And I remember looking up, and I could see him walking across.
Yep.
He was paralleling the tram.
Yep.
Walking from left to right.
On the other side of the barbed wire fence.
On the other side of the barbed wire fence. He was maybe 50 or 60 yards from me. Not anywhere I could have taken a shot, but I knew it was him. Mm-hmm. I think I grunted or I snort wheezed at him. I don't know why. I just was like, man, if I can get him to
get his attention
stay in
or
the
something.
area. I was maybe like 5-10 minutes more from shooting light. I don't know. I was just like, man, I'm going to call it this.
Yeah.
And he did stop. He looked down in my direction, and then kind of continued on. He walked down in deeper into the property. And
that's like, what, 7:15 probably? Ish?
I don't know. Dark.
Yeah.
It was before shooting light. And so he had worked off, and I was kind of hopeful that, like, man, maybe he'll come back. Because we knew he was just going back. Like, like I said, it's not like a big thicket or anything. There's 2 ways these deer are moving.
I mean, it's our last morning. I mean, at this point, we're throwing Hail Marys, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. It was the last day, so I'm like, I got to call it this deer.
Yeah.
I called at him before, and he came right in. So, he chose not to that morning. And so I was sitting there in a stand. It was I think it was around 8:30.
Yeah.
So maybe an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes later, I can remember turning around, and that deer was right in the creek bottom. So not the Fall River, but there's a little creek bottom that runs the whole way up the woods, and he's just walking right down the middle of it. And I was like, game on.
Yeah.
And here we go. At the time, this was
heading back to bed.
Man, at the time, I think this was this is like maybe the second, like, true, what I would call a big buck that I'd ever been hunting. I shot like a 130-inch 3-year-old off my family farm a couple of years prior. This was like my first encounter with a big Kansas buck.
Right.
And I was excited. Like, I was so fired. And here
we knew where he was going, and in the back of your head,
I knew where he was coming. We had the camera was like 20 yards from me. We had gotten pictures of him there before. I was like, this deer is going to come right up in here.
He's going to cut up over the hill.
He's going to walk right past me.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, I turned around. I got ready. We weren't filming at the time. I don't have footage of me killing this deer.
No.
The wind, I can remember, was blowing right down at him. I was like, this deer's going to get my wind for sure. And so I'm just sitting there. I'm hunkered in. I'm leaning against the tree like this, and he's coming. And he turned at one point. I remember he did pick his head up. I think he got my wind, and he trotted up onto the tram, which is where the camera was at, and started walking at me. And he's closing in. At the point he was on the tram was maybe 50 yards from me, and he's walking. He got to 40 yards. 30 yards.
And at this point, I think that Steve and I probably were blowing up your phone because we just got trail camera pictures of this buck walking in front of the camera. And we're like, he had to have shot this deer, right? I mean,
this deer was so close to me when I shot him. He was probably like 25 feet.
And almost eye level.
Because he was eye level.
Yeah.
He was he might have been 5 feet beneath me.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, and I can remember coming to full draw when he was behind
the bush.
He was behind a tree and some shrubs and stuff there, and so I got to full draw, and I remember it was probably 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes waiting for him to crest that to get past that, and sure enough, he ended up, like I said, maybe 15 or 20 yards broadside, slightly quartering to, and I let her rip, and it was a good shot. It was a little low and a little back for that angle. And I think even then that was the early days of me starting to struggle with some target panic, you know. So I was always low.
Yeah.
Fortunately, he was pretty close to eye level, so that didn't hurt me too bad.
Didn't hurt you on the angle, yeah.
And that deer took off.
Straight up the tram?
Well, yeah, he kept running up the tram, and he only made it maybe 40, 50 yards, and he kind of just stopped. And I remember he turned around, and he was hurt. I knew immediately, thinking it was a good hit. And I was just praying that he would go down right there.
Yep.
And it took him a while to do that, but he did eventually he flopped. He didn't like bite the dust.
Just kind of
he kind of
over
flopped.
To the side.
And oh, dude, I was shaking so hard. Like I literally.
I think that's when we got on a call, because I remember talking to you and I couldn't even understand you because you were. But then it was during that call that you said something like he's getting up or he lifted his head up. I can't remember it exactly.
I think I called Margie first. I think so. Margie's my wife. I called her first.
I think you called Dale,
and I could
too.
barely speak. I was like,
yeah,
I just shot him, and they knew what I was saying.
It was cold
but
too.
Not very
I mean, keep
good.
in mind, like every bow hunter knows that feeling when it's cold. It's not freezing, but it's cold, and you have tried to keep such amazing control of your breathing and muscles that when that moment happens and you let it go, you fall apart.
It's uncontrollable. I fell apart. Yeah, I was like literally.
It's the leg shake.
I was holding on to the tree, and the deer's still here, and he didn't die right away. I mean, it maybe took him like 20 minutes to expire.
Yeah.
And so I watched him just like I'm trying to watch through my binoculars, and like he's picking his head up every once in a while. And I was like trying to decide. I remember at one point my uncle on the phone is like, "Man, you need to get down and put another arrow in that deer." And I didn't do that.
You sat for a long time, not knowing what was going on, because at that point
we were unsure. That's right. In fact, you know what, Ian? Jump onto Dropbox and. There's
me filming, right?
Just search for Kansas. I know we're not going to have any sound here, but we'll have the recovery. You're right, because I wasn't 100% sure that deer was completely dead. So what I did was I got down maybe an hour and a half later, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was about that. I got down and I just circled out and away from the deer as much as I could.
I had the rental vehicle. I was in North 80. I said, screw it, dude. Like, I'm coming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm coming.
Yeah.
And so I drove, 10 10
Well, I
minutes to
texted
meet
you
you.
first. You might have been the first person I talked to because I texted you.
Well, I had already
'cause
blown you up 42 times because I'm like, dude, you had
because he
to
was
have killed
right
this deer.
there, and I was
there.
nervous to get on the phone. I didn't
Yeah.
want him to hear me and get up in case he wasn't,
Sure.
totally dead yet. So I texted you, and then you called me, and I remember you're like, I want to hear you shake. Like,
There was probably some explicits after that as well.
probably, yeah. And oh, dude, that was such a cool moment. And so we backed out, and I think I
It's
probably
a long week, man.
I probably just waited out at the, he's got a rental house over there by the property or whatever. So eventually you came and met me.
It was warm too. Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, it was a beautiful day. It was like 70s and sunny. At that point, it was probably 10:30 or 11. I mean, it was like midday. I knew right where the deer was at. It's not like, man,
we knew the approach that
we're not
going to
have to blood trail the deer. But the decision that we made was to get the wind in our favor and try to stalk in on him as if the deer was still alive in case
all
we had
precautions
to put another
as
arrow
possible.
on him.
Yeah.
Whenever you pull up Dropbox, Ian, just search for Kansas, and we might be able to find some kind of like recovery.
I put some B-roll stuff in.
It's definitely in there.
HUNTR Dropbox, so I'm not sure if it's in there or not.
Okay.
I probably still have it on my phone.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, there he is.
There's the deer.
Yeah, that's in front of the hay bales.
This must be the folder that we're looking in here.
This is there's your hat. Wait, go back away. go back.
See, I switched my hat here at this point.
There's the classic Ford hat.
There's
right?
the HUNTR hat.
So this is me following Jared and doing.
There it is. There's the tag 17.
What's that?
So we're right. That's 2017.
Yeah, there you go. November 16th. So if you just keep going.
Bounce around in here.
There's got to be some video in here somewhere. I would think that I uploaded them, unless
it's definitely in here.
Okay.
Are you in the?
Yeah,
he's in the right folder. He's in the right folder.
Yeah, you're good.
Bounce back to hit back in your upper left hand corner.
Yeah, just see if you can find any of these video files.
It's definitely in here.
There's one right here, down at the bottom.
Yep.
Oh yeah. This is the walk up.
Yeah, and so this is after we had stocked up and could see him laying there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we knew he was dead at that point, and we walked in on him.
Yeah, it's just loading in Dropbox. Take him. Yeah, so because he was in that brush pile, and we didn't know, man. We made it took a long time to make that stock and that
so here's the
turnaround
tram.
into it.
You can see this flat spot he's on. This is the tram where I had shot him.
And the property line is 20 yards to your right at this point.
To the right, yeah.
He just piled up right there, man. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, that was fun. I mean, that's the kind of thing though that pulled me through. That first day debacle is the highs are high, the lows are low.
Well, dude, this was really cool. I think this was the first year. This was the first year that. Well, no, because this was twice now this year, because you and I got to recover this deer together.
Yep.
And then this one, and it was really cool.
Yeah, and it again, it was a long week. I think there was a lot happening this morning, because I don't think I saw anything. My dad had missed Super 6 out of the Pine Patch stand the same morning.
That's right. Your dad was ready to fling sticks, man.
He did play, because he's like, yeah, I think I missed him by like 25 yards.
Yeah.
So you had shot this one. He did that. Steve didn't see anything. I don't think like I said, as soon as you shot this, I was ready to get the hell out of the stand and get over there.
Yeah. This was the only deer that we brought home from that trip.
Yeah, and this was probably the first trip that weather really impacted our hunt. I mean, it was pretty mild. Even the day that I hit that buck, I remember it was like 50 something in the morning.
Really?
And I think that movement was super suppressed. Minus a couple days this last day. I think that morning that you shot that was the same morning my dad saw 8 bucks chasing that doe. He missed Super 6.
Yeah. So he had a good last hunt too.
Yeah, and so and this really started that was it, right? Nothing else in 17. We come back spring of 18 for shed hunting. And I think you and I we explored.
That's so
more
cool.
public.
I'm in the zone with that. It was so cool to relive that.
Yeah,
that was such a fun experience. That was the biggest buck I'd killed at the time.
But like most Kansas things, highs of highs, lows of lows.
Yeah.
2018 comes. We put in for a draw. You don't get drawn.
Was it the following year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get drawn.
Right.
So it's like our first experience with anybody not getting drawn, and it's like, whoa. We just had the coolest deer hunt experience in camp, and now like the gang's broken up.
Yeah. I was the only one of our group of 4 that didn't
Yeah, and
draw.
we learned the lesson there.
And we didn't know. We weren't putting in as a group at that time.
Yeah. I think my dad and I probably put in as a group, but everybody else was independent.
Yep. Well, we didn't even know what that meant. We're just like, well.
Yeah, we didn't.
Yeah.
Well, it was such a, I mean, again, knock on wood, since 2013, I've been doing stuff there.
Without any issues. We never thought it would be a problem.
So yeah,
that's right. I was really bummed out about
that.
I was
hunt.
like,
I think we all still went down in August or September and hung stands again and did some camera stuff. You still came down, even though I think you weren't drawing.
I think you needed me to pack in stands for you.
Probably. Yeah, that was definitely it. And dude, and unfortunately, like you weren't there. 2018 was eventful as hell. Mm-hmm. Unlike we were just saying 70s and sunny and beautiful, it was single digits and snow in 2018.
That's right.
I mean, I had I don't even know what you call them, the big booty things over my boots, because when my feet were on the metal stand, they were froze to it. Mm-hmm. In fact, Steve and my dad sat out maybe 2 mornings because it was so cold. They're like, yeah, we're not going. We're not going.
You know what, though? I think that was the year that I killed the Spaniard
at my
family farm. That was November 10th.
Yep. So we went down. Yeah, we left. I think it was the 9th or something.
Were you guys in Kansas when I killed that deer?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was in the stand. I remember you and I talked.
So it worked out.
Yeah, it did work. But and this is such Kansas, like classic Kansas, and how cool it is we go from 2017, where literally the buck you kill in Roberts Bottom is pretty much the only deer we want to kill. Mm-hmm. To 2018, I moved into Roberts Bottom, and I saw 14, 15 bucks a day in that bottom with multiple shooters.
So bizarre. We still can't explain that, why that property from one year to the next
just
is
exploded. I mean, I had, again, not that I got a shot on, but first morning in that stand, I had that one really big buck. Right? Yeah, Monarch that was down there. Came through. I called him in. He worked around.
That's a door.
I don't know.
Why don't you run and check on that, Ian? I think there's somebody knocking at the door.
Might be supplies. And so, yeah, that deer worked around me. I didn't get a shot at him. Probably 150-inch deer. But I ended up seeing a ton of bucks during that trip.
Yep.
And again, a long trip. I had seen a ton of deer, but it was cold, man. And it just took a big toll, on us. But overall, I think it was Wednesday. Yeah, because we usually leave on a Friday morning. So I think it was Wednesday.
Was that right?
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. We got stuff.
Standing out there in the snow waiting for me.
Sweet.
A little bit of gear. I think it was Wednesday. I think Steve or somebody basically said, like, hey, I'm done. Like, come pick me up. Because we were only using a single vehicle. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, dude, I'll get out of the stand. I'm walking out, and I see this buck making a scrape.
Same property that I had killed this deer on the year before. Yep, but you were down a little further. It was
at the bottom of the tram.
Maybe 200 yards from there.
Yep. And I see this buck make a scrape, and, I looked at him, and he had a big enough frame that I was like, that I think I know what deer that is, but I'm on ground level, right? And so I drop my pack and everything, and I end up calling this deer from the ground. I'm grunting at him, I'm pawing at the ground, I'm snort wheezing, and, he circles the whole way around me, and I shoot that deer off the ground. Didn't put the greatest shot on him. He wheeled into it, and so I hit him forward.
In front of the front shoulder.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But it killed him. I mean, he didn't go but 200 yards. And it was a mainframe 12 that I think I had filmed the first morning. I was just getting light the first morning I was in there. We have that in B-roll too somewhere.
Yep.
And because the deer was missing a brow, and I didn't know at the time. And, I killed that deer off the ground, and it was like, it was one of the first deer that my dad and I had got to recover together. He came out with me to look for it. In years. Mm-hmm. And so that evening I put him in that stand. He ended up seeing a couple bucks, and he's like, man, I'm going to hunt this tomorrow too. Again, last day. Right. And I was like, cool. Like, I'm just going to drive around. I'll process the deer. It's one thing for us. Like, we, nuts to bolts, we do it all. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I'm in there skinning and processing the deer, probably drinking with Kev. And, it's like lunchtime, and I think Steve's like, hey, I'm ready to come out. He's at the 80, of course. My dad's like, you know what? I'm just going to stick it out. It was a beautiful day. It went from like being in the teens to like 35, 40 for the high.
Yeah.
which compared to like the year before, it's 70 degrees. And, so they decide to stay in. Well, I processed that whole deer. I like all day. I'm like covered in blood and guts. I'm ready to leave, and I catch that this is the first time we really have a beat on the big giant nine, whatever you want to call him. And I catch him locked down with a doe behind Pine Patch.
I feel like I need to interrupt you. All this Kansas talks make me feel like I need a Miller High Life.
I know. I almost picked some up on the way back last night.
What are we doing?
I know. I almost picked some up.
We'll get some for the next Kansas talk, because that's the Kansas beer
we need
choice.
A beer sponsor, just in case anybody's looking to endorse some
little
people that are just
champagne of beer for the Kansas discussion.
Yeah, we get parched. So I'm watching this buck, right, and he's locked down with this doe right behind the Pine Patch stand, and I guess Steve calls me and says, "Hey man, I just hit one, like a big one." I'm like, "Cool." It's like 4:30. I'm like, and he's like, I just shoot over a branch, so I think I hit it a little high. And I'm like, dude, just hold tight. Like, don't do anything. Don't go anywhere. Don't call anybody. Just, like, you got plenty of time. Just hold tight. And, like, I'm talking to him on the phone, and my dad's calling me. And I was like, hey, like, my dad's calling me. So I'm pick up the phone. My dad's like, hey, just shot one. Holy shit. It's like, here we are. It is the fourth quarter at this point. Yeah. And, like, and
so I think your dad was pretty confident in his shot. He's like, yeah,
he did. He's like,
man,
he's like, I saw it just slide right behind the shoulder. Like, he was hurting. I thought I saw blood, and I didn't see him leave this little patch in the field. So it's like, I think he's down.
Yep.
So I told him, I was like, hey, I'll come to you first. Let's go down and at least look at the blood. Called Steve back. I was like, hey, just hold tight. Like, if anything, come out at dark, and we'll go back in. Don't put any pressure on it. So I go meet my dad. And he is in the stand that I'd hunted all week, right? And I'd shot my deer not too far from it when I was out of the stand. And, we sat there for like 30 minutes or so. And, like, I could literally see, like, the line of blood, with where it's going.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, hey, let's start tracking this thing. And we walk, like, I don't know, 20 yards. And he's, like, right there.
There he
like,
is.
Bed down.
Yep.
And it was it's just 130-plus inch 8-point. Had a really cool split G2. We had a lot of pictures of that deer.
That's your dad's first Kansas buck too, right?
Yeah, and it was actually funny because it was the first buck that I've ever, and listen, I've got a biology background, right? First buck that I ever dealt with that didn't have nuts.
That's right.
The no nut deer.
Forgot about that.
Right? Like, I remember hanging it at Kev's house to skin it, and I'm like, where's his balls?
So what's the consensus on that? Is that an antler
so
bale?
It is, so a couple interesting things. So it was there. They were there. They were just kind of rescinded internally, right, in the
Descended.
system. Yeah, not descended. Yeah, ascended.
Sucked up in there somehow.
Yeah, and but the interesting thing, a whole different podcast topic, obviously, of Fuzzy Wuzzy. Like, he had enough testosterone pumping through his body that he could shed velvet, that he could shed antlers, and that he had his body wasn't big. Like, we're talking peak rut in Kansas on a 4-year-old buck. Like, he wasn't jacked up, but he had a big enough neck on him.
I wonder if that deer was rutting, if he would breed deer.
I would assume that if there was enough testosterone for him to shed out of velvet and stuff, then, yeah, I just don't know how successful he would have been.
Shooting blanks.
Yeah, very possible. So anyways, we get, we're high-fiving, right? I remember FaceTiming the kids and stuff.
Yeah, you FaceTime me.
Yep. Yeah, because it was like, okay, like, let's bring the band back together here. Robert drives the truck down in. We get that deer out. And so I call Steve, and I'm like, hey, man, like, where are you? Well, he and Marcus are, like, trumping all over the place looking for this deer already. And I'm like, shit. So we get back to Kev's. We all meet up. We go out, and, like, there wasn't enough blood to find this thing anywhere, right? And so we looked for several hours, and then it was like, hey, this is the last night. We got to process my dad's deer so that, because, if anybody's hunted out of state, especially in CWD areas, you got to know that you've got to skin that thing, cape that thing down to a skull cap. There are no nervous tissue, no spinal tissue, no brain tissue, nothing, when you're transporting that deer back across state lines. So, we had a long night ahead of us to do all that work. So the next morning, instead of hunting, obviously my dad and I were tagged out. We went back to look for Steve's deer in the same area, and that's where
that's when we found the shed, huh?
So literally a full year after I'd hit this buck, we walked through an area. I was walking through, in a known bedding area, right? And I look, and I'm like, looks like a shed. Like, looking at my binos, I'm like, yeah, that's definitely a shed.
And that tells you that we probably walked right past it the spring prior.
I walked over, and as soon as I saw the antler, I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
And we ended up looking at trail cameras later, and this buck showed up on trail cameras with that giant knot on his shoulder where I hit him.
And he had showed up that year and looked terrible.
Oh, my God. 110-inch deer, you know. And, again, he's 11 years old at that point, too. Yeah. So, yeah, I found that antler, which was
pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool.
A big reward.
Ending to that story. And we've not seen him since, as far as we know.
No, I mean,
he probably
I
has died at this point, but...
Have to assume that he probably gave in at this point. So 19, band's back together, right? And, you know.
I think at this point we're gaining confidence in some of our public land spots.
Yeah, and we did shed hunt in 19 as well.
Yeah,
right?
We shed hunted, and because I remember walking the ants probably for the first time thinking like, man,
yes.
We got to get down.
We put some major miles on, I think, in 19.
Somehow, yeah.
And, you know, 19 was one of those years that, again, was tough. Because we had seen, that was the year that I think we really kind of resonated that, like,
not for me.
You're either in them.
It was a good year for me.
You're either in them or you're not. And you were in them in 19.
Yeah.
I was not.
Well, and I think that I mentioned it earlier. I think that 19 was kind of the pinnacle of my my target panic, and I was really struggling with it at that point. I'd been shooting I had a Wise Guy spot hog, which is a great release. I think you still shoot it and do really well with it, but. That year I had also jumped up to 80-pound limbs on my, I've got a Hoyt Carbon Spider, which I love. It's an awesome bow. But I think that jump from, 70 to 80 pounds, and then also to this release it's got a really hard wall on it.
Sure.
There's not a lot of...
There's no give.
Not a lot of give. There's no surprise as to when that thing is going to go off. I think, I guess we'll see, is the reason that I missed 2 different bucks on this trip. So I think the ants was kind of, I don't know why we decided to break it up that way, but we decided I was going to hunt the ants that year.
We had a really good place up on that like saddleback. We set up a cell camera in September. It's the first time we had seen that wide 7-point.
Well, I think too that I wanted to just be respectful and give like you and your dad, and I think Steve was with us that year too.
Yeah, he was. We because my dad, I think, went right back to Pine Pinch.
Yeah,
Pine Patch stand.
And so I wanted to just like kind of give you guys first dibs at the leases. I mean, you pay for these leases, and so I'm just privileged to come out and hunt Kansas, and so public.
Oh, it's so nice of you.
It's fine by me. Well, and it turned out to be an awesome spot.
It did, man.
Yeah, so we got down.
Not an easy spot to get to.
We had hung this stand in September when we went down. I think maybe just you and I went down.
We did.
You and I went down and we hung this stand, and it to this day is a great spot. It's still in that tree, and we may hunt it in the future. But I started hunting this spot, and we accessed this through a pasture. I kind of have to.
You know what? We didn't even hang stands in September. I had hung cameras by myself in September. Because remember, I had a stand down over the ridge the year before.
That was the year before.
But we ended up, I think you pulled that and pushed it up during the season, like when we got there. I think that's the first thing you did when we got there that afternoon.
I can't be right. I don't think so.
Because I remember being there for cameras by myself.
We went and we walked it. That was the year prior, because you and I went down and looked at that together.
Yeah, that's right.
In September, and I was like, okay, I see why you hung it here. We walked up a little bit and we moved that stand. So then when we went down in November, I went right into the spot feeling pretty good about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we literally, let's not sugarcoat it, right? We drove 17 hours. We get to the house and we're like, man, can't wait to take a power nap and get out. Like we literally put our heads on the pillow and all of a sudden my phone's blowing up and I'm like, shooters, like get your ass
past
up. We're going right now.
Bucks. Yeah, I think it was the Kansas 10 and
Pretty Boy.
There was these 2 big bucks that ran right past us. I was like, we gotta go. We gotta get right now.
Yep.
So we got in there. We all hustled to our spots, and I think the weather was pretty good that week. And so I hunted that spot for 2-3 days probably before I got a crack at a buck I wasn't super familiar with. It was a tight rack.
Mm-hmm. Ian, there's cards in that yellow thing if you need anything too.
It was a tight racked 8-point, and
That yellow envelope right there on my desk. Yep, that one.
I made a bad shot on that deer. Like I said, I was really struggling with target
that
panic.
was a weird. Well, in that deer, I mean, you had seen a lot of deer come through that spot, but that deer didn't approach the way those other deer
I was
come.
in them right away. I was having lots of encounters.
We knew that buck too. I mean, we had good pictures of him down below on the bottom from there.
So I was having lots of encounters with like 2 and 3 year old bucks, and like I was in them. I mean, I was like, man, here we go. This is Kansas. And that buck, like you said, kind of slipped in behind me and was cutting the inside corner. I had anticipated that a deer might come from there, but I wasn't necessarily expecting it. And when he did, I kind of was like, shoot. I got to make this thing happen. And so I turned, I'm facing the tree. I have to throw my hand over the
over the safety
to make
line.
the shot, and I had to duck down, and I think it was still like 40 yards.
That deer bled a decent amount too.
Well, that's what was weird is I let that arrow fly, and that deer turned around, ran off a little bit, and kind of looked back as if nothing had happened.
Right.
And I remember thinking like, that's weird. I couldn't tell exactly where I had hit him.
Right.
But he acted like nothing had happened, to the point where I actually called at that deer while he was walking away. I was like, I must have missed him.
I think I remember that.
I snort wheezed at him, I think, and he would stop and look, and like I thought he almost considered coming back in, and then he eventually, worked out of sight. And I called you after that and told you what had happened. And I got down, I don't know, maybe an hour later or something like that, and walked over to the spot. I found my arrow was laying there, and I walked over just a bit to where, or I was walking down the trail where he had run down. Sure enough, here's some blood. There's a little bit of blood here. Walked a little bit further. There's a lot of blood. I'm like, dude. So I called you, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of blood here. I remember I walked down there 15, 20 yards.
Because he went past the camera again, right? Like up on that flat there?
Yep. He made about past the camera, which we knew was probably 60 yards from the stand I was hunting. And so I backed out thinking, okay, I got to spend this afternoon, potentially trying to recover this deer. There's enough blood here for me to think this is a lethal hit.
Right.
So that's what we did. We backed out. I think you guys had gotten out that afternoon. I went back in, just ready to blood trail for the rest of the afternoon if I had to. I was going to try to recover this deer. So I got on the blood. I was all by myself because, I wanted you guys to go back and keep hunting. Time is of the essence while we're out there, so keep doing what you're doing. I started blood trailing, and I was kind of off and on blood for, probably 100, 150 yards till I hit a field edge. This deer ran up into a field edge, and I was like, man.
Needle in the haystack.
Needle in the haystack. I was looking for, pin needle-sized drops of blood at that point. In hindsight, pretty proud of the effort I put in on that, because I did follow that trail clear up and over maybe a quarter of a mile across this field. And I got down into another thicket where at this point I'm deep into this public. Like it's not accessible. Like if you walk the way that I walked,
you would have busted everything.
Blew all these deer out of here. But I did eventually. I bumped what I'm pretty sure was a big buck. Initially thought it was the buck that I had jumped. I went down. There was no blood
in the bed.
In that bed.
This is where we find now X marks the spot.
Yep. And so I did keep going into this thicket. At this point, I'm just checking beds. Like there's beds everywhere. I'm looking for blood in all of them. Eventually, I did bump the buck that I had hit. I knew I was done tracking for that night. There was just a very little bit of blood in that bed. I walked out and all the way back out and around, maybe 3/4 of a mile from where I had found that little bit of blood in the bed. And I look up on the horizon, and sure enough, there's that buck walking from left to right.
I remember that.
Not far from the aunt's house.
Goes back to saying, like, these deer cover half mile
I couldn't believe it. I remember I threw up the binoculars from that spot, and I was like, that is absolutely that deer, and he looks totally fine. And I made the decision at that point that the deer was not going to die from that hit. And I don't think he did.
No, I don't think so. I mean, who knows what it was? I mean, a leg wound or something.
But so that started the journey down into this new spot that I had found, where all these beds were at. The problem with it was there was no way to access it, like we said. And so I think I mentioned this on the last podcast. We had Kev, a good friend of ours, source a kayak locally from a friend. And because there was a river that, as far as I could tell, was the only way to get down in this spot.
Definitely the cleanest way.
Definitely the cleanest way. So we found that we got this kayak. I found a spot to put in, maybe a mile
Fortunately
upriver.
for everybody, I carry a can of Flex Seal pretty much anywhere I go. I'm not sure why, but it
now
just
you
tends
know.
to be in my truck.
Now you know.
And that kayak for sure needed some Flex Seal.
So we filled some holes, loaded the kayak up. I had everything on there. I had my tree stand, my sticks, my bag, my bow.
And this isn't
my
a big
rattling
kayak.
antlers.
I mean, let's be honest. This thing is like maybe 8 feet long.
Yeah, no, it's not a big
enclosed kayak.
Yep.
You know, and you're a bigger guy, plus all this gear. I remember when we launched you at the bridge.
We were sitting pretty low.
You asked me how you looked, and I said, you're fine. I wasn't real sure at the time, but you were already committed.
Well, I was so excited about this plan. I was like, man, this is why we came to Kansas, to pull something like this off.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. We put in upriver, a kayak down in there. This was probably the following day.
Yeah.
I got in there.
About 3 days left maybe in the hunt at that point?
Yeah, maybe 3 days left in the hunt. Enough time.
Sure.
And so I got all the way down. I parked the kayak. Conveniently enough, there's a nice spot to pull it up and park it. I got up, unloaded everything, found what I thought to be the perfect tree. I'm right on this X marks the spot as far as we can tell from the map.
Knew where you needed to be.
I got to stand in the tree and we started hunting. I think right away, same as
in deer,
right
man.
away I was in deer, and it was maybe the second full day, maybe the third that I'd been hunting a spot.
It was Thursday it was Wednesday because Thursday is the last full day we do, and then Friday we leave or something like that.
Yeah. So either way, same as before, we're sticking them out full days.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heck of a hike to get back in there. So
yeah, and it was 1:00 in the afternoon that this deer we knew as Pretty Boy came trotting right down in a fence line from seemingly nothing. He just kind of appeared. I was on the phone with Margie, just kind of telling her that I was just checking in. I said, hey, it's 1:00. You know, things are kind of slow. It'll pick up this afternoon or whatever. And here he comes. I threw the phone down, I picked my bow up, and I wasn't sure which way he was going to go yet, but he ended up jumping the fence right in front of me into what I now know was 20 yards. I thought he was 30 yards, and I'm pretty sure my dial was set to like just past 30 yards from the buck a few days before.
Right.
And I remember thinking if he's at 30, you know, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Like I'll hit maybe just a touch high, but he was 10 yards closer than that.
And it happens fast, man. I mean, that deer was on you. Like,
it happened really
fast.
It happened really fast. And I mean, not making excuses, and I had been dealing with the target panic, so I intentionally held a little bit high.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Per even 2 years before, you consistently were shooting low on deer. So that's weighing in the back of your head. In fact, I think we thought you shot low on that other deer.
I definitely did.
So
I think it was a low hard
it's just
hit.
sitting in the back of your head. And any bow hunter knows that feeling that it's like you just, like I've done it after I shot that this deer. Right now, I'm cheating away from that shoulder, which is probably going to cause me to hit back.
Yeah.
You know, and there's nothing you can do as a bow hunter there. Your mind is trying to, you know, play a game that doesn't need to exist to compensate for something that is mechanically wrong or panic-stricken wrong.
So the deer jumped the fence. You know, I had my range stuff figured out in my head, or at least I thought I did. I held a little high, and I stopped that deer, and he stopped and looked at me for 1 second, and then he put his head back down and kept going, and I remember being afraid to stop him again.
Yeah,
I was like, this deer's going to freak out. And so I let it fly while he was walking, and I skipped it, you know, right off the top of his shoulder blades. I do think that it got under his skin, like maybe an inch or two, but not.
This is probably mid 150s at that time we were thinking? Maybe pushing 160?
Maybe pushing 160. Biggest deer I've ever shot at that point. Yeah. And I remember thinking instantly, not a dead deer, not a lethal shot.
When you ended up seeing him again, right? At some point, chasing does?
Yeah. So my heart sank. I called Margie right back because I was on the phone with her. I said, hey, I just blew it. I just blew it.
You blew it.
I just totally whiffed on this deer. And I think I called you there shortly after. And so at that point, we were getting close to, you know, some better hours of the day. I was like, I'm just going to stick it out. That deer's not dead. I did get down. I walked over, probably got my arrow. There was no blood on it. And it was probably 2 or 3 hours later that I look up across the thicket that he had disappeared into, and here he comes back. You know, it didn't even phase him. You know, this is a mid-November buck. I mean, he's mature. He was probably five-year-old buck.
Brains
at that
on
point.
the dough.
So, and here he came back, and I ended up watching him for the rest of the night until dark. I got down, that deer was still like within earshot, and I think that was the end of kind of the encounters with.
That was in the end of 2019. I mean,
it was 2019.
Nobody came home with a deer.
I had another close encounter out of that stand, believe it or not, which is
literally the end of the game, right?
It was the very last night, and that deer ended up walking 15 yards from my stand.
Yep.
It was just too dark. It was just too dark.
Yeah. And that kind of ended 19. I mean, a lot of encounters, frankly, on my side, it's almost a blur. Like, I don't even remember. I think I hunted Roberts a lot in 19, saw a lot of young bucks. I think maybe saw one shooter coming in a chase, but it was truly, you were either in them or you weren't.
It was weird. I kind of felt bad because I was in them. I was just in them. And you and your dad, I remember, were struggling to have encounters. They just weren't moving where you were at.
Yeah.
But that's the rut.
So I think one thing that I'd like to do is, this kind of leads us into 2020, and the unfortunate thing on 2020 is like pandemic hits, right? World essentially shuts down. No shed hunting for 2020.
That's right.
We
had some other complicated. I mean, so Margie and I bought a business. Early in 2020. So between that and the pandemic,
I took over full ownership of Stone Road in 2020.
So we had a lot of like life stuff happening, and we just didn't make it out there.
Yeah. We didn't go out for shed hunting. We didn't go out and set stands because we went to North Dakota, as talked about on the last podcast. So literally, we're walking into the third week in November, and it's been a year since we've been there. We fortunately have connections down there that can get some cameras running, but I would say out of anything, it was probably the least prepared Kansas season that we've had, and at this point it's just me, you, and my dad.
Yeah, and we're just going off of history. I think we've felt pretty good about a few of these stands, and so we knew where we're going, but you're right, we were blind.
Yeah, and so the fortunate thing was from the year prior and during the season, we had reset cameras in the Ants, at the Flat, and in a couple other places that batteries died at some point during the year, but we had some data there, not a lot. We had data from our leases, so we knew that the Giant 9 had made it through, which, looking back at those images, very close to being a 170-inch deer. We knew that there were several other deer that were in that high 140s, low 150s range.
I don't think we were real worried about it. We felt good about our spots. We knew there would be deer there.
Yeah, and I mean, again, and I know we talked about this at some point, but like think about, any other place. It's like, hey, I need to know that deer made it through. We literally had no information for a full year that Pretty Boy had made it through, but you committed to that spot anyways.
Yeah.
Right? You just said, I'm going to hunt it. And again, highs and lows, like you're either in them or not. I think this year the weather killed us big time.
Yeah.
I was fortunate that I pretty much pure dumb luck, right? I go into a spot that we didn't even hunt, I think, in 2019. I may have I did set that stand one time. I tried to kill Super 6 out of it.
Yep.
But other than that, I mean, we never hunted that stand. The first morning, I remember, I know Ian's got clips of this and we'll probably catch it on our YouTube. I remember sitting there talking to you in the morning, and I was like, yeah, I guess I'm going to go to the Flat because there's a bunch of acorns down there.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Who knows?
And I remember being so pissed off because I had walked into there I was self-filming, and so I had the Black Magic that weighs, 8 pounds. I got my camera arm. I've got my bow. I've got my bag. I've got just so much gear. I'm sweating my butt off. And I get in there, and it's not too long before daybreak, and I'm just thinking, like, what an idiot. Like, because this is really I won't say that it's the first hunt for HUNTR because we had filmed some hunts before then, but like this was the first one where we're like, hey man, we really got to make something happen here.
Yeah.
But it also was when I was kind of like, yeah, that sucks. Like, I don't want to carry this gear, and anybody that's self-filmed has been there. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And like as I'm like cussing myself out, like it's dead quiet. and I hear something and like look behind me and I'm like, oh, there's a deer like right there. And
I'm
I'm like,
sensing a pattern here.
first morning again in Kansas, right? First morning, first thing. And like, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I think it's a buck, and it starts getting closer and I'm like, oh shit. Like that's a big buck, and it turns out to be one of these 10 points that we had on the leases. And again, not trying to like justify like, hey,
you're on public.
We don't hunt it with corn because we do. Like, again, I'm in a corridor. There's acorns. There's no corn. Like, we're hunting public ground here.
Yeah.
It's just being in the right space at the right time. And literally, that deer walks underneath the stand to the point, like, I think you could see from the over-the-shoulder camera that I'm, like, shooting straight down.
Yeah.
And put a great shot on the deer. And I mean, what a way to kick off the 2020.
Yep. Well, we had good
trip.
weather going into the start of the trip, and
we did.
And
that day was, I think, what we considered to be the best weather. It was
probably
day.
the best weather day, and it just it tailed off from there. I hate saying like, oh, it was pretty anticlimactic, but like we got that done. We celebrated over your deer, and then the week kind of fizzled out. I mean, your dad and I had a few more encounters and stuff, but it was just warm, and it left us, really wanting, to the point where I considered going back a few times in December, and again, never caught those weather breaks and stuff.
We had so many deer on camera, right after, I think, when the weather finally turned right. And my dad and I had seen a really nice 10-point we called Dagger Buck, had this big dagger come out. He ended up showing up on a lease. There was rumors of a giant that was running around there. Still haven't seen that. We had the big 9, a new big 9 show up, which was a 7-point you had seen last year.
Yep.
And so there was all this anticipation after the hunt, but yeah, it kind of, it comes on so fast and it goes away even faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to say that we've got a ton of stories to talk about for 2020 like we do some of these other seasons. We don't. Like, it really fizzled out to where, I know I filmed my dad and we were grinding it out. You and Pat were grinding it out, and none of us really had that great of experiences beyond that first day.
Yeah, I think I missed a coyote. I saw another, not a really high scoring 4-year-old buck that I would have considered shooting for sure towards the end, but never gave me the opportunity. And
you moved back on the other lease, I think, what was it, the last day, and saw a couple up-and-comers that are exciting.
At the very end of the trip, I jumped over, Pat and I did, to Robert's Bottom again, where I killed that 8-point and where you and your dad had killed 2 years prior.
And we had not seen anything on there. We did have a camera running, but we didn't hunt it because it didn't seem like there was anything over there.
And saw a really nice 3-year-old down there, and had a cool encounter with a couple nice 2-year-old bucks that came right on. And so that was a good way to end the trip. But
yeah, really just kind of flatlined. And so, the exciting part is here we are. We're filming this podcast at the end of January. We are probably 4 weeks out before we step foot back in Kansas for shed season.
Yep.
We had a ton of deer. I still have cell cameras on right now. I've got a ton of bucks kicking up on there that are still holding. A lot of antlers that I would love to get our hands on and see and find.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for that, because I think that, getting out and shed hunting these places is like one of maybe 3 times a year we get to go out and just be there.
Yeah, we learn something every time we shed hunt too.
And it really has become such a critical part of the story.
Huge.
Pieces, things like this antler sitting here on the desk, and just the antlers that we find, the new spots that we get onto in the spring and end up hunting when the time comes, is just, it's really a cool way to elongate the season and for us to feel like we're a part of it.
Yeah, so that's something that we've got here to look forward to, and Kansas is always a special place, I think, in all of our minds throughout the season. It's something that we start talking about, the moment that it ends, of coming back next year, and hopefully we all draw this year, knock on wood.
Yep.
And have a successful 2021 season. We'll kick that off here in a few weeks. Who knows? Maybe do a remote podcast from Kansas and be able to tie that all together. But we appreciate everybody kind of listening here to episode 2. As you can tell, Jared and I are pretty passionate when we get into these stories, and you can see clear back to 2013. We have a ton of history in these states, and again, that's kind of hitting it home. But this is really what Hunter is about. Like, we're not walking onto a property, shooting a deer, and that's it. Like, we build history. We learn more and more every time that we're on these properties. And there's a lot of things that we don't do right? And you hear all the mistakes, the hit deer, the missed deer, it all happens as part of being a bow hunter. But it's what we live for at the end of the day.
Heck yeah, man. It's a lot to stomach too. I mean, that's, if you're starting in 13, I mean, that's almost 8 years that we just kind of brain dumped into a podcast here. But I hope that there's some cool stories that came out of it. Certainly it's brought back some memories for me that's got me re-energized to get back there in a couple of weeks to, start it over again.
And for sure. And one thing, Ian, we'll probably work on is let's try to pull some of these Kansas clips out and serve them out on our social media. Just, if anybody wants to dig, by far, go to our YouTube channel and check it out. But let's try to pull some of these things out and tie them back in. And
I love
that
we figured that out today. I mean, Ian, in the future, we'll figure out some. We're still figuring out like all the technical aspects of this.
But we've taken a big step here. I mean, we got mic stands, we got lights.
So if in the future, man, we can find a way to get video and sound on some of these old clips. I love reliving some of that, and it's I think a great opportunity for us to recap and even refresh ourselves on what really happened.
Oh God, I livered them.
Oh God.
All right, guys, we appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Hunter Podcast.
See you guys.
It take me